I think just before I open up and you can start to think about how you want to formulate your question, I would like to pick up a little bit on what Arild pointed out and what the report has mentioned. It was about the results-based financing and the model of RED as using results-based financing as the ultimate goal. And the report, as Arild said, uses the word as a political motivator, that results-based financing is a political motivator rather than economic incentive. And I would like to get some more insights and if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mean on that path. And start off there and then we'll open up for questions. Please, Pat.
Sorry, Ida, my mind was wandering.
Oh, then I'll just take it again.
Yep.
So Arild was talking about results-based financing as being the key model for RED+. And what you highlight in your report is that you see that results-based financing has not been an economic incentive. You put it has been a political motivator. And what is the difference really, and what implications does that have for RED and results-based financing? If you could just elaborate a little bit more on what you mean.
Yeah, I would do that, Ida, sorry. Yes, I much enjoyed Arild's comments. I thought they were very helpful and very stimulating. I would enjoy discussing them at length over a beer, but preferably in a country where the beer's a good bit cheaper than it is here in Oslo. But I think that this, I mean, I take the point, that we make these preliminary findings. This is us sort of trying to find an explanation to why has Indonesia made such spectacular progress and not actually spent any money, or not significantly, And it was trying to think about this, and I think this is a really interesting point. But I do believe that there is mileage in looking at the separation of, the knee-jerk economic incentive. I mean, I remember doing an evaluation for the RED Plus partnership 3 years ago, and we talked to people from many recipient countries, and the message that we got then largely was they saw RED as, this is the next donor gravy train for money in forests. So, okay, they've got all these hoops they want us to jump through, but this is just the donor fad, in 3 years, 5 years' time, it'll be a new fad. So there was that cynicism about it. I suspect from what we're now finding that there has been a separation of views and that countries have evolved in their views. And the analogy that we drew from on the report was the very old motivational theory paper by a man called Herzberg from 50 years ago almost. And it's about this two-factor theory that, there's a difference between, if you like, people being really motivated as opposed to being people who are dissatisfied becoming satisfied. And so there's a difference between the two. It's quite complex, but we felt that this idea of political recognition was particularly important, certainly from Brazil, and I think increasingly for Indonesia. I would agree, we've only got some very preliminary findings, and we certainly need some more research on this, but I think it would be a rich vein to exploit. I think the other point in response to Arild that I'd like to make was, we deliberately avoided going into detail on the theory of change and the results-based framework. And the reason for that deliberation was that we feel very strongly that the theory of change and the results-based framework needs to be owned by NICFI and everybody involved in it. It's not something that you get outsiders to impose on you and say, well, here's your theory of change. You say, thank you very much, we'll get on and start changing. It's not like that. It needs to be a much more intensive process which is owned by everybody involved. So it can't be coming from the outside, and it's important that I think that goes across. Okay. Ida, I'll shut up now. People can get a break of voice.
Thank you. So then we open up the floor. First, Vigdis Halvorsen from NORAD, the Civil Society Department. It should be on.
Okay, yeah, there it is. Yes, as you said, Vigdis Halvorsen from the Civil Society Department in NORAD. We are, of course, very happy that the evaluation has found that our civil society partners have achieved important results, especially in terms of safeguards and indigenous people, but also contributed importantly to the overall development goal. We are also, of course, extremely happy that you have acknowledged the changes that we made since the evaluation on the specific evaluation on civil society portfolio in 2012. That we have managed to make it more holistic and strategic and improved our result management and knowledge management. And yeah, I will of course add to that we did that in close cooperation with the NICFI Secretariat and colleagues in NORAD. I just have a quick comment to one comment and one kind of comment / question. The comment is that to be part of or be exposed to a real-time evaluation, we found that extremely frustrating and very hard and terrible, but also extremely useful. And I must say that the timing was extremely good for us. In 2012, we were in the middle of starting the new phase of the civil society portfolio. So the timing was extremely good and very important, and I think the clue actually to that we actually managed to do some major changes. This time, and of course I'm also inspired by Arild's introduction, you're almost too nice to us actually. Because my question is, how do we continue developing? And how do we go? We are soon entering into a new phase on the civil society portfolio. And we would like to continue improving our work. And how can we do that? And how can we be even more holistic and more strategic and better part of the greater NICFI project? And also, is there, since one of your main conclusions is that the total of the big NICFI project needs better planning and better strategic approach, is there any lessons learned from the civil society portfolio, or do you think it's too small and too different from the rest of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Vigdis. I think we just take a quick response, and then I noted some in the back there. Pat, would you like to just give a quick response directly to?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we can be nasty if you want us to be, Vigdis. You know, don't worry about that. But I think I think, and I do understand it's very hard being evaluated, and you know, I'm very aware. I've sat on the other side of the table too, so I have experienced it. I think in terms of the Civil Society Fund, I mean, we feel that you've got now a really good results-based framework. You've got a potential there which can be built on. And also, I mean, certainly talking with Per, you know, and we know already that there are a lot of strategic issues being now explored through the Civil Society Fund. And it seems to us that, you know, there's a good success there. And it would be good to build on the success. But of course, we do understand that, you know, if you were to have a much greater mandate, then of course you're going to need greater resources. And I think one of the things we have observed is that it always seems to us in our evaluations that Norway seems to take a pride on minimizing its management cost. And, you know, there is a point of diminishing returns. There's a point at which if you are too thin on the management, then you start to have mistakes happening. And we recognise that you know, it's a very lean system that is being applied here. But I think there's very good potential, and I'm really pleased your comment that, you know, the closeness of the relationship between yourselves and the rest of the NICFI. We think that anything that brings you all together, the closer you can cooperate, the more you collaborate, that we think the better it is for the overall performance.
Okay, thank you. I think we open up. There are two questions in the back. The man with the green T-shirt as well. Okay, please introduce yourself.
Hello, hello. Is it on?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. And Danea Usher from Development Today. So this is a question to Per Fredrik and maybe Arild as well. According to this evaluation, Norway is responsible for 62% of all global funding on RED. I hadn't seen that figure before. The evaluation says that other donors are showing no signs of substantially increasing their funding. And today, Pat Hardcastle said that it's going to be necessary to explain to countries, to many of the countries in the RED process, that there are not going to be results-based payments. He put it in the sense of how are we going to explain to them that that's the reality. So my question is, or my questions are, where does that leave this Norwegian RED experiment? Is Norway holding out until other rich countries, other donor countries change their minds? Or are the goals of this experiment going to have to fundamentally change in the light of this reality, in the light of Norway perhaps remaining the only donor, big donor in the RED field?
I think we're just, if you're noting that, and we'll get back to your answer, and then we take the gentleman in the green T-shirt there. Please introduce yourself.
The man in green is Vegard By from Scanteam. I would like to make a couple of comments about Brazil, supposedly the star case in this. We recently made an evaluation of, I think we can call it a door opener program of this, the Norwegian Rainforest Foundation's Amazon program. And we had the opportunity to look also into some of the present conflicts and discussions going on in Brazil. I'm surprised that we are so little critical to the managers of the fund in Brazil. And they are sitting on the lion's share of the Norwegian money here. I noted that you're speaking about a sharp learning curve. The question is it really on the rise or on the contrary? I'm very surprised that Norway has maintained a so-called hands-off strategy when it comes to Brazil. I think with the amount of money that we have put into this and the political prestige about it in Brazil, I think we could have made much more out of it in terms of at least demanding the BNDES to reach the level of the other development banks, which we have been very keen to at least accompany in a learning process. Just to remind you that BNDES is managing more money than the World Bank and the Inter-American Bank together in Latin America. So I think if you look at Germany, which has a minor share of the Amazon Fund, they took it very seriously and have been very active in accompanying the bank in improving transparency, in improving the consultancy processes and their ability to work with civil society and with forestry, which is not their special competence. So I'm really very surprised that you had not been active from Norway's side to work more directly, both politically and technically. Now there is a very interesting situation in Brazil. Now that Marina Silva is going to be the counter-candidate of Dilma Rousseff, this may really become, the whole Amazon problem may become a crucial area in the election campaign, also opening up for the kind of discussion that we are having in Norway about it. So I would really hope that one of the lessons learned here is that we're more active, more proactive in our both technical and political dialogue with Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question there in the back, the lady with the curly hair. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Hege Randestveit. I work for the Rainforest Foundation Norway. And I've followed the development of RED Plus in Indonesia for many years, both as civil society but also as a representative for the Norwegian government earlier. And I'm, of course, excited that you call the development in Indonesia most spectacular. In my view, and I've already told you that I'm somewhat biased here, that progress that we've seen in Indonesia is mainly due to the very good cooperation between civil society in Indonesia, but also the international civil society and the progressive parts of the Indonesian government. as well as the Norwegian government. And lately, we also see the private sector, especially in palm oil, are moving forward with some interesting initiatives. The multilateral initiatives, however, especially the FIP and FCPF programs in Indonesia have, in my view, more or less been in the way and not contributed to this progress in a very healthy manner. So I listened to Per Fredrik earlier and was excited to hear that you say that NICFI is considering some change in how you work with the multilaterals. And I wonder how, what your plan is for this when it comes to Indonesia in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Three very good and well-covering questions. So starting up with the development today, the question, would you like to start off there, Per Fredrik?
Yeah. Since I am standing in for a politician here, I will do what politicians usually do, and I will answer the question I want to answer rather than the one that was asked. I really have to comment on Aril's point on Brazil, which is just plain wrong. The reduction in deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon after we struck the $1 billion deal is approximately the same size, probably a little bit larger than the reduction was before we struck our deal. So the absolute numbers are basically the same. Second, of course, that part is much harder. We all know this gets harder as you get closer to zero and farther from your baseline. So I think as far as causality goes, that obviously doesn't put the case to rest, but at least we do have a case that one of the ingredients of causality, namely cause, has to come before effect, is actually in place, and you were claiming the opposite. We do also know that there was an upgoing trend, quite significant, that was reversed quite soon after we struck our deal with Brazil. Again, one can speculate whether that would have happened with or without, but the chronology is quite clear. Several of the main measures that are put in place in Brazil were put in place after we struck our deal with Brazil. That said, Brazil's incredible results are to the honor of the Brazilian themselves, clearly. We hope we have contributed. This evaluation say we have contributed. It will never be resolved. I think that's a general point. If one wants to impact on very, very big issues, and deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is a very, very big issue, unless one has very, very big money, and I mean, you know, outsizedly more than we have, you will be a part of the solution, and you will never be able to prove causality. It's easy to prove causality and prove that the money you spend and what you've done has had a direct effect. All you have to do is make your effort small enough. Then you control all the variables and you get it done. But you do not solve what we were asked to solve, is to get at the global deforestation problem. So this is something we'll have to live with. It's irreducible uncertainty, and that's just the way it is. I'll also add to the question of economic incentive or political incentive. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, but I'm going to try to clarify what I think is the problem. I think when you talk about an economic incentive as changing, you know, the incentive for whether I stand there with my chainsaw, I cut down or not, and you just pay me what I would have made for cutting down, so that's a direct economic incentive. What we're talking about with REDD+ is an economic incentive for a political action. And that's the crucial distinction, and that's, in our mind, always been our theory of change, that what is needed, or at least what we can contribute, is an economic incentive for political choice. That political choice will then alter the incentives for the person with the chainsaw. He or she can be taxed, regulated, subsidized, or if the chainsaw is there illegally, put in jail. That's the cost-effective way, and that's the public policy way of approaching a deforestation problem. So I think the distinction between economic and political incentives is slightly misplaced in this discussion. Then to the question I was actually asked. I don't think that number is correct. But I won't insist on it. 62% sounds too high. There are significant other donors. It depends a little bit on how you count. You should remember that a lot of other donors had ongoing forest aid programs that were tweaked to be more RED-like. And you can count them or not, or count the percentage of them. It's not easy to say. But I think the more interesting point, of course, is that back in 2008, the expectation was for huge cash flows for pay for performance. Many of them, large parts of those cash flows from compliance regimes. We were a few votes away in the American Senate from getting the Waxman-Markey bill passed, which would have just altered the landscape completely as far as pay for performance funding for RED Plus is concerned. And that hasn't happened, and that's a very fair point. So what do we do about that? I think the new government has actually made a start on that narrative in various public documents. The basic point is, A, there are others coming along on pay for performance, Britain and UK especially, Britain and Germany, sorry, especially. The German Red Early Movers program is a small-scale program, but it's very well designed, very good. We have joined them in that. So the first element is that there is positive change among other donors in paying for performance. The second element is that, okay, this is a question of incentives, and those incentives don't necessarily have to be pay for performance money. The one big incentive that has changed quite fundamentally over the last year is the fact that I think we now have, well, I'm not sure about the exact number, but probably more than 60% of global trading in palm oil is done by companies that have pledged to free their supply chains of deforestation completely. That is a massive change in incentives for governments that want an active palm oil industry, and that's a very high value-add industry, so it's a major change. Similar things have been happening in other commodities. The soy moratorium in Brazil has been fundamental to the success in that country, for example. So I think working with the responsible private sector, not only to see that they fulfill their own requirements, but that they become part of the coalition, the political coalition in these countries, to implement a more sustainable land use regime, thereby reducing deforestation and ensuring that agricultural development happens on degraded land or through productivity increases, because that is now in their self-interest.
Thank you, Per Fredrik. I think we need to move on to the next question. I know also that...
Should I answer the
yes,
question?
Please.
Yeah. The basic point is we look at more differentiated incentives. That is the basic answer to Anashar's question. But so, yeah, well, Germany does have a slightly larger workforce than us, and they have a far different capability to work with institutions effectively with the competent personnel, because they have a larger pool of people that can do that. So that's the first answer. The second answer, of course, is that we have been working with Germany, been in dialogue with Germany on the BNDES issue and the Amazon Fund issue. We're at the moment working with them to extend their effort to support improvements in the Amazon Fund. So we are engaging. And the third point is, it's not like we're not engaging with Brazil. Of course we are engaging with Brazil. But this goes back to the basic point mentioned earlier, that sometimes it is more effective, and we do believe it's more effective, to make our case quietly and where we have value-add potential. And yes, also accept that in quite a few cases, it is actually better to let these institutions sort things out mainly on their own. There is the ownership issue here in addition to the effectiveness issue. We do believe that BNDES has made great progress.
Okay, thank you very much. We're getting closer to the time of where we need to end this up. So I think I'll go to Arild Engesen, and if you can wrap up a little bit and also include some response to the questions, and pick up also on the Indonesia question. Some of you, Eva, for example, you didn't answer that. Thank you, Arild.
Just a small comment on the Brazil, and that I don't think I was wrong. Of course, I never think that. but I also checked the Brazilian figures this morning. I think basic story is this. From 2004 to 2009, deforestation reduced from some 24 to around 7,000 square kilometers. And that has been stable, 5-6, ever since after. So most of the huge 70+% reduction happened before Norway money came into play. I think that's a straightforward fact. And then it's always the attribution problem. How much does 1 billion, the promise of 1 billion, how does that affect policy process? And there's no good method to test that question because there's no control case for Brazil. I think the one question by development today is a critical question that NICFI and all of us interested in RED needs to answer. When RED was introduced, the game plan from Norway was like this. We provide interim funding until 2012, and then the carbon market takes over after the agreement that we got in Copenhagen. Oops, we didn't get it. So we get it in 2015, maybe. So here's a figure that Norway, provides, roughly funding international is about $1 billion per year for RED. If you want to have a result-based payment, $5 per ton of carbon, you reduce deforestation by half, it's $12-13 billion per year. So it's a huge gap between what it takes to have a result-based system. So we can have two ways. We can hope that it's be included in a RED carbon market that emerged after the meeting next year in Paris. A lot think it's unlikely. And if not, what's the alternative? Well, it's aid money coming up with that. And I don't either see a good prospect for that. So that means that we need to reconsider the model. We cannot pay $5 for emission reductions. It's simply not. You need 25 Norways to do that, and Norways don't grow on trees. So should we have a much smaller payment, or how is that model to be revised? I think it's a major challenge. It's a very good question. And I can answer it at length if...
And that we don't have
over
now,
a beer.
unfortunately. Eva, do you have some final remarks, very short?
Yes, I think this debate on economic incentives is very important and crucial for how we shape the future of RED. The incentives at the country level, payment from in global mechanism or from Norway to the country, is more like a political incentive for decisions made in the country. The direct economic incentives can be one of the elements of the national funding mechanisms of payments to users at the local level. And I think the level of economic incentives at the local level need not be very high for people to make some changes in their natural resource management. We have seen from many of the pilots that are going on in different countries that from nothing, which is the case in most places, there's no payment, there's no money, to a little bit of incentives to communities makes a big change. And I think this is one of the reasons why we need to move into a process of studying the outcomes of many of the pilot projects that we have been supporting around the world. This could help us define ways to help us design incentive systems at the local level, which are not to be operated by us, by the local financing mechanisms that are developed in the various countries. I think that study is very important to be able to face the expectation gap that we obviously see in front of us. As a part of that, I think the work of continuing the work through civil society is going to be key in this program. I would like to suggest that we discuss more focus on the civil society of the South. That may not be the message that all the NGOs of Norway want to hear, but I think in the long run that is a more effective way of influencing processes in our partner countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Pat, do you have some final remarks, very short?
I think, Ada, what I would say as a final remark is just to also add to what I said earlier about the team. You know, we've been 4 years plus doing this real-time evaluation. It's been very demanding at times. It's been absolutely fascinating, and we've seen it as a great privilege to be involved in this, and we've much appreciated the way in which we've been able to work with everybody. We haven't always seen eye to eye, I know, but then you wouldn't expect that we would. But we've found it very stimulating, very rewarding, and thank you all very much for the opportunity.
Okay, and then I would like to thank the panel, the team, of course. There's a big discussion, and it's not finished at all. So please continue doing it at your organizations on the web, different seminars. And thank you all for coming, and please continue to follow us on the web. I also would like to just say that all the statements and questions and comments that we've heard here today, the evaluation department will take into account into the follow-up note that we are writing, and which will be handed over to the Minister of Climate and Environment for follow-up. So thank you all, and have a good day. Thank you. Oh.